Hi everyone, and welcome to Parents Ask Us Anything. Today you've got myself and Jordan on the call. I'm Josh Wintersgill. I've got SMA type 3. I'm 27 years old and I'm based down in the southwest. Jordan?
As Josh said, I am Jordan, I am 23 and I have SMA type 2 and I'm also based in the southwest.
So we've been asked to ask some questions that have come in from parents that have basically allowed parents to ask us anything relating to SMA, and myself and Jordan are going to do our very best to answer the questions that have come through from parents around the UK with SMA. By the looks of it, there's some very interesting questions here, so we're going to get straight into things and get it started. So the first question, I'll start off, Jordan, and ask the first question. So we've had here, at what age did you become conscious or embarrassed of toileting with your parents? So why don't you go first on that one, Jordan?
Okay. I think that being conscious of being toileted by your parents, it happens naturally as you're growing up. I think you realise that you need assistance to go to the bathroom. Personally, I've not been embarrassed of being toileted by my parents, but my mum stopped toileting me around 18 when I got my own carer team, and now she only does it if I have a care shortage and stuff like that.
Okay, and I think from my side, I had a bit of incontinence issues growing up, sort of weeing myself a lot, and I think one of the things I had when I was about probably between the ages of maybe 4 and 9 or 10, I often felt like when I was out in the playground or having fun with friends and family, that going for a wee just felt like another activity to do, and I felt like it was going to distract me or take me away from missing out something very exciting. So I ended up weeing myself quite a lot, and it kind of had a negative impact, but a positive one at the same time, because I don't know, I just felt that when I just didn't want to miss out on anything, and I didn't get embarrassed with my family if I had an accident. Obviously I got embarrassed if my trousers were showing that I'd had an accident and I was with my friends. That was really bad. But I think more so my parents got frustrated because I knew that I needed to go, so all I needed to do was ask. So sometimes there could be some signs that you as a parent might pick up that shows that somebody, you know, that your son or daughter might need to go to the toilet, and they might say no they don't, and it's just having those conversations. But no, I think you're right, Jordan. I think it is a natural occurrence that takes place, and I think as you probably get older, you may become slightly more conscious as an individual with your parents doing some of your personal care. But again, I think, you know, each situation is different, I would say.
Yeah, something I forgot to mention was obviously periods as well. That was a massive sort of transition, being a young girl with SMA, because it was another extra thing to add to your routine. The best thing that we did was just communicate. I communicated, well, mainly via my mum. She sent a message to my TAs at school, and we developed a new routine for when I'd use the bathroom, so that everything was sort of like regular and controlled for.
Okay.
I think that's important to mention as well. That brought me on to the second question, which is about catheterization as a young adult. Have you been catheterized since, Josh?
I know personally for me, I just use a bottle, and I've not been catheterized from an early age. Again, that's probably going to vary depending on the type of SMA that your child has and how independent they can be for themselves at that particular point in time. So for me with SMA 3, it's very much I've been using a bottle, and there's some cool products out on the market that you can use. I use a Uri bag. There are female and male versions, and it's essentially like a little tub that's got like a balloon type bag on it, and you can just push it up inside, and it literally fits in a bum bag. It's tiny, and that's been really good. So as a parent, if rather than carrying around a whopping great bottle on the back of a wheelchair, you can carry this tiny little thing around, and it's amazing. But no, catheterization is not something I've experienced. I know I know there's people out there that have done it more so from an adult perspective rather than child perspective, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of SMA adults that I know that do that have been using the suprapubic catheters. I personally haven't gone for that option yet. I quite like that I still have the ability to use the toilet in the average way. I don't know, it's just a complicated issue that I think is personal based on your own context and your own access to toileting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's you have to weigh up at when is the right point to do it for you. Some people might temporarily have a catheter, particularly if they're traveling and you're traveling for a long period. It can be very useful. So some people might temporarily do it, but others might find that actually, you know, if going to the toilet on the go when you're going to work throughout the day can be particularly challenging, and you know, it might be that you need to spend half an hour or 15-20 minutes out of your working day just to go for a wee, it soon adds up. And sometimes I think people might dehydrate themselves because sometimes going to the toilet can be seen as an inconvenience, like I said earlier, as a child. And so sometimes you avoid drinking, which then leads to dehydration. And so actually considering catheterization at an early age, depending on the child's or the adult's ability to support themselves going to the toilet and how they feel, it could be a good option to do, certainly. But from my perspective, it would be something that I would want to try and hold off for as long as possible.
Yeah.
Have you got anything else you want to add to that, John?
No.
Okay. So the next question we've got on the list is, how did your spinal surgery go if you had it, and how did you feel afterwards, and what was the recovery period like? So I'm going to pass that over to you. I think we're both spinal surgeries, or both had spinal fusions. So go for this one, Jordan.
Yeah, I had my spinal fusion at age 11. That was after wearing like a soft foamy brace as I grew up. I never had one of the tight fitted under the clothes ones. And we decided to fuse when my curve was about 90 degrees, but it was still flexible. Overall, I had a really great experience with my surgery. I was only in hospital for a week, and I was really lucky that after I had the surgery, I found my new center of balance much more sat up than I ever was before, and I had actually gained head control that I hadn't had before. So that it was really positive for me. What about you, Josh?
Oh, I had spinal surgery at 14. A very similar curvature, 90% curvature, S-shaped, and I think I've now got 2 rods, and I think I've got a 40% curvature. But going back pre-op, I was very slumped over. Everything was quite challenging. All my skin was closed over, sweating a lot, and it just wasn't good. And for the long-term benefits of my health, not having the operation, for me, really, it just didn't make it made sense for me to have it at the time. I did have a back brace from very early on, at probably at the age of about 5 or 6, right the way through up until sort of 10, 11. And the back braces were horrid. I remember one time my mum put my back brace on at the top of the stairs, and because it was a full length back brace, it had a little lip at the bottom above my bum. And when I was a lot more mobile, I used to be able to bump myself down the stairs. And one morning I bumped myself down the stairs and my back brace caught the top of the stairs, and I rolled all the way down the stairs with my back brace on. I mean, I don't know how I didn't do myself some severe damage, but you know, back braces are good for children growing up if you are, you know, not one. They don't op on young children. I think they let them grow up a little bit, get to sort of Jordan's age. I think you're quite young to have spinal fusion at 11. So I think they try and use a lot of orthotics to support you as much as you can as a child, and then look at that later on. But I think there's more that maybe parents or older children that are considering going ahead for their children or the individual to have a back operation now given that there is more treatment out there now with Spinraza, etc. Certainly when we had ours, there was no treatment, so it was an absolute no-brainer, because having the operation, the benefits were huge on respiratory, posture, and all that sort of stuff. So really it was a no-brainer decision. But I think now there's a lot more to consider having spinal fusion versus what there was 10, 15 years ago when we had ours. So I think what's important for me was that I made all the decisions myself to have spinal fusion. It wasn't like my doctor said you have to have it, or my parents said you had to have it. It was a choice that I made. And I'm probably sure you were probably similar. I don't know. Did they have more influence over you?
No, we had a big conversation, and I actually spoke to somebody who was 2 or 3 years older than me, who was just about to go through their surgery, and we had a chat about how he felt about it, and that was all I needed.
Yeah, and in terms of how did you feel after the op, Jordan? I know you were out in 1 week, and I was out in, I think I was out in 2 weeks, which in the grand scheme of things is exceptional to be out in such a short space of time, because they normally say, you're in hospital for a month and then there's quite a significant recovery phase afterwards. But yeah, what was your experience like after, and what was your recovery period like?
I remember that I took about a month or 2 off school, and I had district nurses coming out just to change the last of my bandages and things like that. But all in all, it was a really easy recovery, I would say. However, I had my surgery in the November, and then I contracted pneumonia in the January.
Oof.
Now, I don't know if it's anything to do with having all my organs rearranged and my lungs stretched about or whatever. But that was difficult, and I definitely felt the impact when I was having chest physio and things like that in the January, of my back being a bit more sensitive than it was before.
And before you had the op, did you have a lot more mobility in yourself pre-op, and how did you transfer pre-op? Were you hoisted still, or were you lifted and transferred into bed? How did that work?
I was mainly hoisted, but I was told that after my surgery I could only be hoisted. Now, as you grow up, you do get in situations where you need to be lifted, and I have been lifted since with no issue, just only by very, very strong people that I trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the biggest change for me, really, is that I wasn't going to be lifted anymore. My posture was awful before. I was completely slumped over, as you said. I had just started to develop a pressure sore on my one side, and obviously skin integrity is something that we're always told about. But I haven't had any issues with pressure since. I also haven't had any hip discomfort since, because that was a big thing. I had a lot of pressure on one of my hips, and then that sort of balanced out as the surgery fixed it.
Yeah, I think overall spinal surgery, if you're looking at SMA for the long term, it's all, it's a no-brainer in terms of the benefits that you get from it. There are short-term issues that you will get, like adjusting to different ways. So, new postures, things like Jordan there mentioned about previously being transferred, without using a hoist as often, to then being fully hoisted. It was the same for me. I was never hoisted pre-op. I was always only ever, I used to stand up with my dad, and he used to get me dressed, and I used to be able to do all of that. So going from being completely lifted to then full hoist transfer overnight took crazy amounts of adjustments. House needed adapting because I needed a ceiling hoist. Everything just changed. And for me, my recovery was very good. I did a lot of pre-exercise prior to operation, lots of physio, lots of exercise on the lungs, etc., etc. And one of the things that I regret that I didn't do post-op was get back into sport and exercise as quickly as I should have. I feel that if I was a parent now looking at my child going in for spinal surgery, one of the things that I would be pushing for is physio, etc.
It's 19 hours.
And then making sure that there is a post-op recovery phase that you go through that gets you back into doing things that you did before. Because you know, 6 weeks to 8 weeks out of doing not a lot with SMA is going to have a big impact on fitness and your muscle strength. So I highly encourage parents to make sure that they are nailing what that recovery phase looks like
And
post-op.
what
So,
that looks like for their child too, because obviously I wasn't necessarily as mobile before the operation, and it's good to keep testing things afterwards.
okay. So
And sorry, I just wanted to say that obviously it's not an option for all people, and I know that we've met some SMAers who can't have the spinal fusion, so it's not the be all and end all. It's all about comfort at the end of the day, isn't it? Comfort and the best mobility that you can have.
yeah, very good point. Now I think that's it's definitely individual dependent, isn't it, on, you know, circumstances as to having fusion. But, you know, if the option's there, then, you know, I would definitely highly consider it. Do you want to do the next question?
Yeah, let's move on. This next question says, looking back at your time in school, do you have any advice for a child with SMA and their parents? Would you do anything differently and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for a child, I think for the parents, I think the most important thing is that the school ensures that you are, or your child is integrated well. Your child's got a good friendship network around them. That is hugely important because, you know, that can prevent any sort of isolation with friends or bullying or anything like that. So I think as being a parent is just making sure that your child's got that real key support at school and good friendship groups, and over time that will just blossom, I think. But with a young child with SMA, it's very hard. I think it's just encouragement, and for children to get involved in all activities that they possibly can, and even activities that the child struggles with. I still think it's not cruel to make them do activities they struggle with. I think that's important because it helps them learn what their boundaries are, and it teaches them to push themselves a bit more and also get out your comfort zone. So I think, yeah, I would be pushing for my child with SMA to do as much as they possibly can and make sure that the schools have got the right network in place to, you know, make sure that your child gets the best at school. I mean, I did all sorts. I was doing physio on mats in the teacher's staff room. I was doing egg and spoon races with my walking frame. I did stick my egg to the spoon, but anyway, the school wanted to know that. But I mean, there's things that you can do, right, to be creative at school. So what would I do differently at school? Do you know what? I don't know if I would do anything differently. I thoroughly enjoyed I thoroughly enjoyed school. I think it was brilliant. I had, you know, great friends, great staff, got involved in everything, and it was, you know, great fun. How about you?
I had quite a positive school experience as well, particularly in primary school. I had very, very strong relationships with my teaching assistants, and I think that really carried me through any issues you have with sort of inclusion. They're your advocate, so that was really good. I also blue tacked my egg to my spoon, and everyone asked backwards when we played any of the running games. So there is inclusion there, and it was really good.
So we're basically advising children to cheat. No, pardon?
Only a little bit.
Oh dear, that's not good, is it? I think it's interesting though, because there's a big difference between, you know, primary school and secondary school. Again, secondary school was a big step up to primary school, you know, because you're going in as this, you know, young little innocent child into a big school, and you just never really know what to expect with the older kids at school. You don't know how they're going to approach you. Are they going to try and play around or mess around with your chair and all that sort of stuff? And I just think I don't know what secondary schools are like anymore, but I'm sure they're much more focused on inclusion now. And I know a lot more schools seem to be a lot more accessible. But again, I think the same applies in secondary school. Have a good support network, you know, make sure that you've got a good working relationship with teachers, at the school, you know, actively monitoring your child's progress, and encouraging your child to get involved with all the activities at school. There's, apart from that, for me, there's nothing that's jumping out to say what else I can possibly recommend or do differently.
What I was really keen for in secondary school was inclusion, but not special treatment. I wanted to blend in as much as possible.
Yeah.
So my TA wouldn't sit next to me in class. She'd sit at the back and I sort of flag her if I needed any practical help. And that was a really important part for me. I did lunches on my own with friends, and then I'd be collected at the end, or I met at a classroom. You've just got to sort of adapt your help with what stage of school you're in, and also how confident and physically able you are.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very, very good point. And that takes me back when I was at school. I had a walkie-talkie. So what I would do is I would sing to my carer if I needed any help, or my support worker. So they'd be off helping other students that might need more support in the classroom. And so that would enable me to be free and independent in the classroom. So I didn't feel like I had someone hovering over my shoulder. And then because I was relatively self-sufficient, when I needed help with the toilet or getting to somewhere, I had my walkie-talkie and I could communicate straight away with my TA, or my PA. And I think now you wouldn't need that. You just need your phone, right? Or an app that the school will allow you to communicate.
My TAs have phones.
Yeah. So I think that's a really, really good point, actually, is that depending on how old your child is and the school that they're at, you know, having that technology or device that enables you to communicate with staff or your support worker outside of the classroom when you need them, so that you've got as much independence as possible in the classroom. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah. And I would sort of encourage parents, if they've got any other questions about school, about the adaptations we did, or even about exam allowances and stuff like that, just get in touch, because we'll be happy to answer questions about that as well.
Okay, so moving on swiftly. Question 5 is, we are constantly encouraging our daughter to do physio and exercise and try to explain the benefits to her. Are there any exercises or activities that you have continued to do as an adult and enjoy? Jordan, do you want to do this one first?
I'm a terrible example. I was also one of the girls that didn't want to do their exercises, and I do regret it a little bit now, particularly with my joints and stuff. The access to physio changes as an adult, and you don't always have that one-on-one attention every day like you do as a child. So in that respect, I was a bit of a bad example. However, one exercise that I do like when I can get there is swimming. I think swimming is absolutely amazing. Any sort of weightlessness, any sort of movement in the pool is brilliant if you can.
Yeah, I echo the swimming front. I think for me, the most important thing, with depending on how old your daughter is, the most important thing is to make physio and exercise fun. Children like fun things, and you need to make them do it in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're exercising, so they're enjoying themselves. So, you know, we always used to, when I used to do exercises with my nan, we used to sing songs and, you know, do like sit-ups, and used to do like row, row, row your boat and all that sort of stuff. And it just, you know, put music on, you know, use different objects to do exercises as well. So like if you're doing like, I don't know, bicep curls or something like that, you know, put like some teddies or some objects that your child likes picking up and playing with, and use that as a way of, you know, doing exercise. There's cool things that you can do with like resistance bands as well. But going back, sorry, go on, do you want to add to that one quickly?
I was going to say, you could also, if you wanted to, involve it in daily activities. Like one of mine was cleaning the table, because it involved that action. And if you can blend it in with the stuff that is just helpful, then they won't even know they're doing the exercise. Yeah,
and that's the beauty of it. You know, things like just even baking a cake and having to, you know, like knead the dough with your hands. I mean, that is intense exercise for the hands, but you don't realize you're doing it. So, you know, that's just another great example. But one of the exercises that I used to do, and it was quite brutal, but it was swimming. And when I was between the ages of 8 and 11, or 7, probably 7 and 11, I would go down swimming every morning and do 16 lengths of a 25-meter pool before school. Yeah, and I used to be heavily involved with swimming, and I used to love it. And you know, it's the best exercise that you can do with SMA. So if you can get yourself to a swimming pool before or after school, if you're able to do that, then good. You've always got the weekends as well. You don't need to over swim. I just enjoyed it so much. But you know, just swimming once a week, and then maybe doing or hydrotherapy, if you can do hydrotherapy twice a month, followed by, you know, some swimming and then a little bit of exercise in and around the home, that should be more than plenty of exercise to do, as well as all the day-to-day stuff that you're going to be doing. But swimming is definitely up there. Another great activity that I love is table tennis. Again, depending on your daughter's mobility, table tennis is a very good exercise to do if they've got hand-eye coordination. Gosh, what other sports are there? I used to do badminton.
Did you ever play blow football, where you use a straw to blow a foil ball around?
No, that's good for the lungs, right?
Yeah, definitely. That was one of my favourite workouts.
Oh my God. Okay, there you go. What's it called?
Blow football? You
Blow
could name it
football.
something else.
Yeah, let's not. Let's keep this for the parents. So I think that kind of sums up some of the exercises there to be done. I think if any of you want to get in contact with me or Jordan on the exercise and physio front, because there are other stuff that needs to be covered in there about working with your OTs to build out exercise routines and all that sort of stuff, do drop us a line. But we need to move on to the next question. What's the next one, Jordan?
Okay, the next one is, what is one thing your parents did when you were growing up that you wish they hadn't done or wouldn't do, and what did they do that was useful and supportive? So it's both sides, really.
What is one thing your parents did when you were growing up that you wish they wouldn't do?
Make me go to bed early.
Do you know what? I don't know. I don't think there is one. I mean, my parents had a very good. My parents had a very good basis of what I should and shouldn't be doing, and I never felt uncomfortable with anything that I was asked to do. So I don't know. I'm sure there is something that frustrated me as a child growing up. But I think the best advice that I can give is what they did to help, or that was useful and supportive. And I think that's just encouragement, you know, being there to pick you up if you're having a bad day, you know, saying everything's going to be all right, or you've got to keep going, or, you know, just generally being there and offer and being that kind of rock for you. I think that's the most useful and supportive thing you can do as a parent, rather than focusing on what they wouldn't, or what things that growing up that I wish they hadn't done, because I don't think there's nothing that I don't wish my parents hadn't done for me.
Exactly. And I think all parents feel a lot of pressure to get things right. I don't know if it's just SMA parents or if it's parents in general. But there is no right or wrong. And sometimes you will get things wrong and you will upset your kids over silly things, but they'll upset you too. It's just about sort of being the best role model you can be. I know something my mum did was encourage me to be independent and to really push myself to do things that I thought I couldn't. And that's really helped me up into adult life.
I think there's one thing that, thinking about it now, that I see maybe other parents do, not necessarily just, you know, with kids with SMA, but, you know, generally speaking, I see parents that are they baby coddle their kids far too much, and they kind of do way too much for their children, and stopping them from being independent. And I think you can easily do too much for a child. And I think given with SMA, it's very, as a parent, I don't know what it's like because I'm not a parent with a child that's got SMA. But it's so easy just to do something because you don't want to see your child struggling. but it's horrible to say it, but you kind of need to step back and let them do it to the point where they then ask for the help, you know.
Yeah.
And if they ask for help too much, then you need to be that strong parent to say, no, you're going to have to try and do it on your own. It's just getting that right balance of identifying when a child is really, really struggling and they've tried to the point they can't do it, and then stepping in, rather than just assuming that they're not going to do it and you do it for them, because that's totally the wrong way to do it, in my view anyway.
And especially as you're giving them life skills, aren't you?
Yeah.
We have to ask for things now. To whatever level your ability are, you will be asking people for assistance at some point. So it gives them the ability to know what they can and can't do and what they need to ask out for. And I think that's really, really beneficial.
Yeah, I think if you take simple things like you're sat at a table, and on the other side of the table, if you were to get your chair and move around to the table, that object would be in reaching distance, rather than just sitting there and saying, oh, Dad, can you grab that thing for me, please, on the other side of the table? My dad would go, no, get your chair, go around the other side of the table, grab it, and then come back. I'm not going to do that for you because you're quite capable of doing it for yourself. And it's that type of stuff that parents need to not bend over and do for their kids, in my view. Because I think as a parent, you do gauge as well, don't you, that the things that are impossible for some child to do versus what a child could do, although you know it's going to be a struggle for them, let them try and do it.
There's no harm in trying, really.
Nope. Okay.
Can I ask you a bit of a side question?
Yeah.
When you were younger, did your parents ever talk to you about SMA and what that meant for you?
No. No, they did. That is a very good question. And it's always important that parents are open and honest about their, speaking to their child about the condition that they've got. But, from my point of view, as a child, you don't really care about what your condition is. You just want to be a kid and grow up and have fun. And I think as long as the parent has the vision of what needs to be done to support a child to get, to adulthood, and then, hopefully, have an adult life that is, as independent as possible. I think the most important thing you can do is just support. What was the question again?
Just whether your parents had talked to you about SMA growing up.
Yeah, no, I think I didn't really have too much of it. I knew I had a disability for sure, and I knew, I wasn't as strong as everyone else, but I didn't go into too much. They didn't go into too much detail about how it affected me. It wasn't until I was about, no, I was older than that. I think I was about 20 when I realized I was type 3 rather than type 2. But I think it would be really interesting to see a study actually of the psychological impact of a child knowing a huge amount about their condition as a child, and what they then look like in 18 years down the line versus a child that had no clue about their condition, but was pushed to work really, really hard, and actually compare the difference between the two. And I would imagine you'd see a very big difference.
I also wonder if it differs between men and women, because I know that as a child, I wanted to know everything. I was always asking details, even about the genetics and what that sort of, it would differ that way as well.
Yeah, I think this is going to be down to the parents, because if your parents are actively involved and want to learn more about the disability, that will naturally reflect on the child. Whereas my parents, they weren't really actively involved with Jennifer Trust. They didn't really get too involved around the disability front. So naturally, I wasn't in that kind of circle, if that makes sense. So I would say it's very much dependent on the adult and how involved they get, that will then reflect on the child, I think. But yeah, that's how I was brought up.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, what else have we got on the list? Or do you need to answer that one? You need to answer that one, don't you?
Growing up, I wish they would do. No, I sort of mentioned about my mum pushing me to be
Yes,
independent.
you did.
Yeah.
Okay, so shall we go on to the next question?
Yours?
Oh, so we've got, how do you manage needing a personal carer when trying to develop your own relationship and friends? And what happens when you want to go out and just be with your friends or a friend?
So even that one changes depending on what sort of age you are, doesn't it? I remember sort of when I was in sixth form age, I started going out with just my friends. But I'm off on the bus, mum, and she'd be a bit like, "Oh, text me where you are," and things like that. But at that point, I could just rely on friends. I didn't need a carer. I went to university is when I had a full-time living PA, and I think it's about building the boundary. I think letting them know when and where you need them, and things like that. But it's hard to gauge, especially for children, because there's not a lot of times that they will be on their own, is there?
No, I think a lot of cases parents will allow friends to come around to the house, have fun, and do the personal care when it's required up until a certain age. But if you're a parent that's got carers coming in, early on in your child's development of growing up as an adult, I can't really comment on that because I don't know how you would strike that balance at home. But when a child gets to a certain age, you've just got to say, look, let them go out and be with their friends. Always make sure they've got a phone. And I think it's really important that you understand your child's friends in terms of how mature are they, and can you actually see them being reliable if something was to go wrong, if there was an accident. It's always making sure that your son or your daughter has that responsible friend that is going to be able to help if something does go wrong. But I think most importantly, you've just got to let your kids be kids and go out and be with their friends. It's difficult if they're completely dependent on a carer. I mean, when I used to go out, I found creative ways of being able to go to the toilet with my friend, like not with my friends. They'd like maybe get my bottle out my bag or something. But there's creative ways that you can go out without needing a personal carer. But if you're young, and and your child relies on a PA, I think it's important that you strike that balance with the PA, that when your child is out with their friends, that PA just steps back and observes and gives as much space as possible, where possible, to just let that child be, playing with their friends.
Absolutely. And there's no harm in sort of introducing carers to friends and family, as that is their role and they are there. It's good to just sort of chat about why they're there, sort of, and get everyone on good terms.
Yeah, okay.
Are we ready for the next one?
Yes.
Was there a point when you came to realise the impact SMA would have on your life, and how did you manage that? Who did you speak to?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't think I've really ever spoken to anybody about how it's impacted my life. Or I think as you grow up, you get to a point, you get as a child with SMA, as you grow up into a young adult and then an adult, you naturally go for a phase of asking yourself different questions, like, how am I going to get on at school? How am I going to get on at college? What happens when I go to university? What the challenges are going to be there? What's it going to be like trying to have a relationship with, a boyfriend or a girlfriend? I think it's just a natural step that you kind of all take, and you adapt with SMA to that. So I don't think there's a pivotal moment in life where you go, I now realize how SMA is going to impact me, because it's impacting you every single day. So you just learn to deal with that impact. So I think it's not at the point in when I come to realize the impact of SMA would have on my life. It's just learning to deal with the impact of SMA on a daily basis rather than having that particular moment in time. But I think in terms of managing it, I just get on with it. that there, to put it blunt, there's nothing you can change about the situation. It is what it is, and you've just got to get on with it. I think probably the best advice that you could probably do is go and speak to a psychologist. I know a lot of the neuromuscular practices in the NHS have access to support and guidance around, you know, the psychology side of living with SMA and how to manage it. I've only ever had one conversation, and for me personally, it didn't really help me out too much. But I think that, you know, if there's that mental barrier that is really affecting you, I think that would be the best place to start, is with the neuromuscular clinics and getting, you know, professional support in that area.
I had a bit of a different experience. I did have not just one realization moment, but at least 2 or 3 times in my life where I've really reflected on it. And the first one of those was in primary school. Now I remember it was in one of our physio sessions. We weren't doing any physio. I was writing a song, and it was a song about not being like the other girls. Now that, to me, looking back on it, is just like weird. It doesn't feel like it was me, but that was me processing it, I think, at that time. And I think the same sort of thing happened in my teenage years when the hormones kick in. You hate everything anyway, and that just gives you another thing to hate and to be grumpy with. So those were the 2 main ones. And then probably again when I was in uni, when I realized that this is my adult life now. This is what SMA is going to look like for the next, say, 10, 20 years, whatever that looks like. And it is tough. I totally agree that the neuromuscular psychology teams, if you can get hold of a psychologist that way, that's brilliant. But also just be honest with your family and your friends. I think encouraging your kids to talk about how they feel is always a good thing, whether it's about SMA or normal school stuff or just normal life things. It's having that open communication and making sure that you've got trusted people in your life, that if things are difficult, you can talk about it without judgment. And it's not always about fixing the problem, like you said. I do just get on with it, but sometimes it gets too much, and that's when it's a good idea to sort of just have a chat to someone, do something you like, something like that, or even reach out to SMA UK, because I think they are such a fantastic charity when it comes to talking about mental health as well as physical health.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, you know, in some respects, there's probably certain areas of my life where I could have, you know, spoken to people, but I think it's one of those difficult ones of, you know, that there are moments that do stand out to me. So things like when I was at uni, I didn't have a living carer, so I was in bed at like 9 o'clock at night whilst everyone was doing pre-drinks and getting ready to go out. And it's those little moments when you think, oh bloody hell, you know, I can't go out now, and that's the real impact of SMA. That's when it kind of hits you, and that, when I go back to my point, you get those moments all the time throughout your life as you get older. So when you start getting older into sort of your teenage years, I remember there was a point where, you know, there was someone that I really liked at school, but I couldn't interact with them in the way that, you know, everybody else could potentially interact. So it was that realization of, you know, oh, how am I going to do that? I've got to think of different ways to interact. And it's just kind of, you then kind of not doubt yourself, but you just, I don't know, it can sometimes knock your confidence a little bit. And like I said, you're just constantly doing that all the time and adapting, which is why the psychology aspect can be really useful. But I don't know the psychology front for children. I think that's quite an interesting one. And the more a child can speak about the challenges they've got, the better. You know,
communication.
Okay,
always the key, isn't it?
Communication. When you went to secondary school and university, how did other people respond to you? How do you think people respond to seeing someone in a power chair?
That's quite interesting. I was actually one of the first wheelchair users in my mainstream school. So when all the adaptations were being done, everyone was like, "Oh, what's this all for?" And it was for me. I was quite lucky, really. Everyone was quite accepting. I did have a few run-ins with stroppy teenage girls, but no more than I probably would have as an able-bodied student. There were a few older boys that would that used to sing "They See Me Rolling" every time they saw me, which I hated it, but it just is what it is, isn't it? What about you? What was your experience like?
I did have a couple of kids at school that would always try and grab my joystick on my chair or beat the horn, I had someone once call me Brum. I don't know if you've ever seen Brum, but I got called Brum. And you know, in some respects, it's frustrating. And then in other respects, they're just kids and they're just intrigued and they're just learning and stuff. So I think it's really hard to respond from that point of view, how other kids see me in my chair. I think the more that you interact with kids that do that sort of stuff and, you know, be brutally honest with them, and kind of try and put things into their perspective, actually most kids will actually learn and respond back to you in quite a way that you probably wouldn't expect, which is quite incredible. But yeah, it can be frustrating. And I remember I had a good group of friends, and there was a particular kid that always used to give me grip all the time. It was really, really annoying. And I just remember all my friends coming around me and like protecting me and just sort of like, you know, making the kid go away. And then eventually he just never bothered. So, you know, I think it's difficult. I don't know. I don't think there's I don't know.
And also you can get your school involved. You don't have to be that parent that sends an email all the time, but as long as you've got that, like I had my good relationship with my TA, they could get us in a conversation with the stroppy girls that would have weird comments about me. So we could talk about it, because a lot of it comes from ignorance, or they haven't been a wheelchair user before, or they haven't had a friend that's a wheelchair user before. So it's like you said, giving that opportunity for learning on both parts.
It is. And I think the schools and universities are fantastic. I mean, you know, broadly speaking, universities are well equipped with accessibility and inclusion now. There's not so much to really worry about there. It's more the school side, where there is still such, I would say, a big gap around disability that still needs to kind of be, you know, looked at. Because, you know, when you're dealing with university students, a lot of them are a lot more aware of disability, you know, the students generally, and you're an adult and you're not, you know, you always get one idiot in a nightclub or somewhere at uni that is always going to be a pain in the backside. You're never going to get rid of that. But definitely secondary school, working with teachers, etc., to make sure that other kids, I think it's important you have that support bubble again at school, that, you know, people can, you know, come to your need when you require it.
And actually, when I was in primary school, everyone thought my wheelchair was really cool. And they were like, oh, can I drive it? I'd be like, no, it's just for me. So it's things like that, isn't it? It's all perspective.
Absolutely.
What has been your biggest frustration / challenge? And what has been your greatest achievement or proudest moment?
I think my biggest frustration and challenge, and it's constant all the time with everyone with SMA, is just the fact of having to constantly re-justify your disability to get support. It's just the biggest frustration for me. Living with SMA, fine, whatever, I can deal with that. That's not a problem. The problem is having to justify every time you need something or support to enable you to be independent with SMA. That is the biggest challenge that I think all of us, you know, we will all have in common. So for me, that's the biggest frustration with SMA, is that justification piece for support. And then my greatest achievement or proudest moment, I would probably say there's a few in terms of my business career, but I think one of the biggest achievements for me was probably finishing university, purely because it's that realization that you've developed as a child, you've gone through the teenage years, you've gone to university, you've moved away from home, you've learnt to put dinner on your table, you've got used to carers, not your family providing your care. Now you've graduated from uni, you're out there, and now it's time to really kick on with life. And I think it's that recognition point of like, you know, now my life starts, you know, and that is kind of, I think for me personally, one of the biggest and proudest moments for me was just getting uni out the way. That was so tough. That final year, I lost so much weight. It was so stressful. So yeah, I think those are the two key bits for me.
Excellent. I think I absolutely echo what you said. My biggest frustration is having to prove myself and prove my disability, especially to social services. It is such a hassle. But I also find that just having an inaccessible world that just doesn't seem ready for me. Like, I was really keen to move out when I got back from university, but there is no accessible housing in my local area. Now, I don't know if it's because of where I live, because I live in quite a small sort of rural area, but it's something like that that just adds so many more barriers for me. It's not as if I could just save up for a mortgage and go and get a house, because if I save up for a mortgage, then I also have to start contributing to my care, which means I've got less funds, and then I can't afford to move out. It's silly things like that really, really get on my nerves. And also another challenge or frustration for me is travel. No, this is your forte. I haven't been able to travel yet, but I think things are changing now, aren't they, Josh?
It's because you're a wuss. You need to grow a pair and get yourself out there and go and travel, because it can be done. They're all Pardon?
It's absolutely the cost as well. It's having to pay for a PA's flight, a PA's hotel, someone else. And it's things like that that I just don't have in me. Even the organisation of a holiday.
You're a good-looking girl. You need to get yourself a partner, and then they can do your personal care as well, if that's what you want. And then you can
pay
go
for holiday.
Carers. Pardon?
Pay for their own.
See what I've done, people? I've made Jordan blush now. Look at that. Those cheeks are so rosy. Hi.
Thank you. No, I like that. That's some good advice. In terms of my greatest achievement, one of the massive things for me growing up was driving my car. Learning to drive, I never thought I'd be able to do it, and it's completely changed my world. I was able to do work placements. I was able to travel the UK, go with my mates and stuff. That was a massive achievement for me, and I'm really, really proud of that.
Very good. Okay, next question. And now I think this is our final question. So our final question is, what is the best advice to give our child about how to be independent in the future, and what can we as parents do to help that independence? Well, we've covered it off, I think, in all different areas really of all these questions, and it's difficult to give one piece of advice to a child, but I think the most important thing or advice that you can give is to promote independence and support it, rather than telling a child how to be independent, because there's so many different ways an individual will grow up to become independent for themselves. So my best advice is to make sure that you show the child, to be independent, and let them take more of a reign in their decision making growing up, rather than you making all the decision making for them. So I think, let your child make those decisions, and difficult decisions. Let them fail, because that's what life's all about, is making decisions, failing and learning from them. So don't feel like, oh, I should have made that decision for them. Let them make it. So I think that's probably my one advice that I'd give, is let your child make the decisions to be independent.
Absolutely, as you would any other child, with or without a disability. You've just got to promote them to be their best selves, to live the happiest life that they can lead, and that's all you can do, because that's all a parent wants to do. They want happy, healthy children. So just encourage that the best that you can. And you just know that you're going to get things wrong. Everyone gets everything wrong. We're only human. So don't be scared of mistakes, and don't be scared to let your child fail, like Josh said, because it's all just a big learning curve.
Yep. So there we have it. I hope we've covered off some, you know, useful points there for you as parents. And if there's any particular areas that you'd like to go in more detail on a personal level rather than on call, by all means reach out to me or Jordan. You know, I'm happy to have, you know, slightly more personal conversations where needed, if any of you parents are concerned or got any sort of other questions that maybe aren't so appropriate for this. You know, we're happy to do that offline if need be, because I'm sure there's questions out there that you've probably got that want to be asked. So yeah, reach out to us. But I think, Jordan, we've done quite well there. I think we've given a very broad range of, you know, growing up as a child with SMA and what we would like, you know, if we were to do it again, what we'd want our parents to do, and, you know, advice in terms of how parents should facilitate, you know, the support growing up. And yeah, I think we've done a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.